I'm a customer success coach from now on. So we're kind of hosting this Game Day Insider, this series. We've had a lot of really great moderators on, and this week we're lucky enough to have Nick with us from the NCAA. We've got 3 topics here that we're going to be discussing on our Insider today. Before we get into those topics, though, definitely check out our slide that we're looking right here. Again, as I mentioned earlier, don't have to share your video, but we definitely recommend it. And then rename yourself just to have your name dash the organization or school that you're representing. And then we're going to kick things off with a 2-word check-in. So if you hover over your screen, you should be able to find the chat button. So if you want to go ahead and open that chat, our check-in is going to be your favorite podcast. So what's your favorite podcast that you've been listening to? And I'm going to go ahead and venture to guess that almost every guy's going to say something about Joe Rogan. So have at it. So while you're dropping those check-ins into the chat, the topics we'll be discussing today. So first one, keeping pace with uncertainty. So, planning for multiple fall sports scenarios. And number 2, adapting your content strategy. How do you stay relevant when there are no games? And experimentation and trying new things, everything from video licensing, live streams, and content partnerships. So hearing from not just Nick with ideas, but everyone who's joined us today. And then lastly, navigating, social issues impacting college athletics and kind of any ideas or kind of ways that you've been going about that. So anytime if, Nick's, talking about something or answering a question, if you want to drop a question into the chat, I'll be monitoring the chat. So I'll make sure that those questions get answered. Otherwise, very laid back flow here. So don't be afraid to, jump in with questions, jump in and share, what your team is doing or any of those initiatives that you have on any of these topics that we'll be covering. So with further ado, I will hand things over to Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney, and thanks everybody for joining. I see a lot of faces that I know from around the college sports world, so it's great to chat with you all and connect with everybody again. And actually, I have to shout out Xavier. That's where I graduated from. So see the big X right behind Sydney, and then see Hannah and both Hannahs, I guess, from Xavier Online. And I think Riley is from Xavier as well. So a lot of Xavier representation, have to represent where I came from. But no, thrilled to be here. A little bit about me. I work at the NCAA. I'm a digital strategist for the championships department. So oversee digital and social strategy for a couple sports, specifically women's basketball and baseball. Also work on a couple other sports on the side. And then oversee digital product, which is how I got connected with the From Now On crew. Oversee the 5 mobile apps that the NCAA publishes and curates throughout the season and championship experience for fans on site. I think, this is when Riley first came to me, it's an interesting time to talk about what's happening in sports. I mean, if we would have had this conversation a month ago, I think this would have been a totally different conversation than it would have been a month before that, and certainly totally different than what we'll be talking about in a month from now as well. So I think that, it's a great conversation to be having, and certainly rely on all of the people in the college landscape to help everybody else navigate. The NCAA certainly doesn't have all the answers to know everything that's going on, and certainly from our team, we don't really have any more insight than what anybody else has. So it's great to be able to connect and learn from everybody and see what we can be doing better. So the first question that I wanted to bring up is all the uncertainty with fall sports, all the uncertainty with winter sports, professional sports, college sports as a whole. We're not really sure what's going to happen with that. I think anybody from the content or marketing side. And I guess the question is, how are you preparing? What scenarios are you preparing for? How in depth are you going? What are some of the things that are stopping you that, I guess the pain points, besides just the uncertainty of not knowing what's going to happen? I guess that's kind of the first question that I wanted to toss out there.
No pressure.
I can start, I guess, from the NCAA side and talk about kind of some of our pain points. Again, I guess outside of the uncertainty of knowing what's going on or what's going to happen, I think that's top of the list for anybody who's on this call. But I think outside of that, it's how far and how in deep or how in depth we prepare for each of the scenarios. Are fall sports postponed? Are fall sports canceled? Where should we place all of our emphasis on content strategy? How do we keep our fans engaged? I think is a big thing that we're dealing with right now. If fall sports are canceled or postponed for that fact, how are we going to keep our fan base for NCAA volleyball or NCAA soccer engaged when there's no sports going on and haven't been having sports for a few months now? I think that, from that high of a lens, I guess it's a troublesome conversation that we all have with ourselves. Is we're at the NCAA, so we technically make some of those decisions. Our team certainly is not involved in any of those decisions. We find out the same way that you guys all find out, but it's interesting and trouble just to figure out how in depth and how we keep our fans engaged. I'd be interested to know if there's any other feelings like that with anybody through the marketing lens or social lens.
All right, Xavier's already been picked on, so I'm going to keep it going. Hannah, any kind of initiatives or ideas that you guys have been running through just as of late with things?
Yeah, I feel like we're all at that point where we're just kind of like, we have no idea what the hell is going on and when we're going to know what's going on. So we're just kind of taking it all day by day and starting to figure out, like, what are we going to do? This year is supposed to be our 100 years of basketball, and hopefully we have a season to make it the 100 years of basketball, or it has to be next year. So we're starting to put together what that campaign looks like for 100 years to keep our fans engaged. But we've been having the same conversations, like, if we're not selling tickets, what are we doing? What is our story that we're telling people? If we're throwing a billboard up, what are we putting on it if it's not tickets on sale? So a lot of stuff up in the air.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, that day by day, it's almost too tough to plan into the future or something like that, just because so much can change. Mm-hmm. And just kind of tackling that day by day. What can we do today? How can we bring value today or this week even? Any other?
I think I don't see anyone from our social team on, so I'll just chime in. I think from our standpoint at Texas and in general, I think this year, everyone knows that 2020 has turned everything on its head. But this time gives us an opportunity to do something very unique, I believe. And that is just to focus on what we should be focusing on already, which is culture. Letting people see what it's all about, reminding people why they became a fan of the program in the first place. What are the special moments that you experience as a fan? What are the things that you experience on this campus on a game day that you can't experience anywhere else? So I think it's providing a really unique chance for us to reset and kind of get away from that need to always have a sales pitch. Since we're all faced with limited capacities and different ways we're doing sports, I think there's a lot of positive that can come from that when things return to some sense of normalcy. I think we'll find ourselves in a better position, and we'll have, if we're smart about it, we will have grown more affinity from our fan base if we kind of take this time to bring folks back into a message around culture instead of buy your season tickets today or renew your season tickets.
That's real interesting, Aaron, and that's something that we've been talking, excuse me, a lot about from our national platforms too. Is I think I don't want to say it's easier by any means because it's certainly not, but the draw that you and anybody else on campus has for the culture and some of the things that made Texas fans Texas fans. There's not a whole lot of people who just say, I like college baseball, I don't have a team, or I like college basketball, I don't really have a team. It's always some sort of draw that is associated with a team. So it's interesting to hear that as well.
I'll make a quick comment on that. I like the part of it of doing things that help you out now, but then also put you in a spot to come out ahead when fall sports or when sports do resume. You know, from now on, we face a different set of challenges than probably most of the people on the call here, but things like, digital ticketing and digital programs that help us get through the fall, also, end up helping us, 2 years down the road when those things are still going to be around. So finding those things, the things that stick through this uncertainty, but then also help you come out on the other side are going to be key.
I can speak to athletic communications at Syracuse, and one of the unique challenges that's really hit us in the last couple of weeks is although we do have some student athletes back on campus, we need to be very cognizant of the impact of the virus and how people look at the virus. So as an example, while some of our most popular content would probably involve the student athletes, we want to make sure that anything we use of them, that they're wearing masks. And that takes away a little bit of their personality and makes it more difficult to show the light moments that maybe you're trying to engage your fans with. And it's made it really difficult. It's almost put us off a little bit for a while because you could get by with the unpredictability of the games if you could still focus on the student athletes and the coaches and their interactions, but we're not able to do that yet, understandably so. But that's a completely different challenge than not having game action.
Absolutely. And Pete, that's something that our team has tried to focus on through the last year is the personality of the student athletes. I'd say more than a year ago, if you would have asked our team, it was all on the field, on the court coverage. And that was primarily what we focused on. And in the last year, we've really tried to make it an emphasis on promoting the personalities of these student athletes. They're much more than just the star on the court and the person that the fans love to come and watch compete. They have a whole story behind them. They have a whole personality that makes them who they are. And the NCAA actually went on a road trip for women's basketball, and I see a couple Syracuse people on, and including yourself. And the first stop on the road trip was Syracuse, and that whole trip, the 18-day trip around the country, was focused on growing the personalities and the brand of these student athletes, these young women in college sports. And for us, that was a huge success and something we look to continue into the future across many other sports. But it's interesting you bring up personalities, and especially during this time, you bring up an interesting point with the masks essentially taking away the majority of some of the creative content that you might be able to get out with the photos and the videos of student athletes, whether it's just during practice or just being on campus as a whole, showing some sort of normalcy, I guess, to their routine. But yeah, that's interesting. Another thing we're being asked to consider that just came up, at least for me yesterday, was because the recruiting rules keep getting pushed back in terms of coaches' interactions. I know our coaching staffs are really anxious to ramp up social media or digital presentations because they're not going to have the opportunity to see the kids in person like they normally would. And that's another thing on our plate that we have to be creative about. Absolutely. So it looks like we have a couple questions. One from Carlos at UTRGV about any podcast or if anyone has plans to start their own podcasts. From the NCAA side, we have a podcast, and it's actually been changed a bit different than what it typically has been. And since COVID happened, it's actually shifted a lot towards, I guess really just emphasizing the social series that I'm sure people have seen online. But I think from the podcast side, it's been an interesting new medium for the team who oversees that to develop and try to engage with new fans, especially talking about some of the things that a lot of people are interested in from decisions that the NCAA is making and trying to interpret some of those decisions. But getting to that new audience, a lot of the social series are 45 minutes to an hour long. So if somebody can turn that on in their car, just turn it on while they're working. We've seen some success doing that as well. Just a different medium for fans to engage content. I wouldn't say we've created a whole new podcast. It was certainly there before COVID happened, but transitioning it to focus on something different has certainly been a success.
It's mask proof. You don't got to show yourself wearing a mask if you're on a podcast.
Exactly. Any other thoughts on, oh, sorry, go ahead, Sydney.
No, I was going to say, if anyone does, utilize podcasts with their coaches, staff, or student athletes, if you want to drop a link to the podcast in the chat, or maybe, a particular episode in particular, or, kind of unique topics that maybe you've explored on your podcast. I mean, even if you had a podcast already before all of this, what's some kind of, discussion topics or focuses you've had on your podcast that maybe you wouldn't have had if it weren't for the current environment that we're in?
Are there any other thoughts on some of the issues or challenges that your departments are facing when trying to plan for the uncertainty or upcoming seasons? Cool. We can go ahead and pivot. The second question kind of aligns with this a bit, but some of the ideas around how to stay relevant with your fans. And I know we already talked about not having the personality piece, but something that I think we've all noticed is a lot of departments have, including the NCAA, has relied on the archive content, going back to what's been done in the past, showing some of the best of, whether it's full games or just individual moments. I think, at least from what I've seen personally, it seems like fans might be getting a little bit worn out of that. And thankfully, with baseball and basketball and other professional leagues starting up, maybe they'll be more inclined to enjoy some of that throwback content now that they have full sports to watch or live sports. But what are some of the other content methods that departments are thinking about that might not be archive-based or might not be focused on some of the student athletes who came through your program, some of the more, I guess, current student athletes?
I'll go. My name is Beth. I'm from UTSA. One of the things that we've been doing, as crazy as it sounds, is we've kind of started relying on TikTok trends. As weird as that is, one of our best performing social posts we had is when we did the Vogue challenge that was going around TikTok, and that really, really took off because it was just pictures of our mascot that we had from the past that we just slapped Vogue on top of, and it worked out really, really well for us.
That's awesome. It's funny, some of the things like that, going to TikTok, a platform that nobody had really heard of a year ago, or I guess started coming up a year ago, is now turning into a whole strategy for a lot of departments. Anybody else have any other thoughts on some of the newer or ways to newer strategies or ways to engage with your fans outside of some archive content?
I think I've seen some schools do promoting their student athletes getting involved in the community in some way, shape, or form, whether it's delivering food or different things like that. I'm not sure if anyone on the call has specifically done that, but that seemed to be something, especially, right as COVID was hitting, that I saw a few athletic departments highlighting. And I thought that was a great way, again, you're building community, highlighting what your student athletes are doing, and hopefully, kind of communicating that we're all in this together as part of your guys' culture.
And we did have another question come into the chat, and I know Aaron threw a response in there as well, but how do you celebrate or acknowledge already in the works facilities projects when, positions, team spending is shrinking in all those areas?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. From what the NCAA and our team has a unique perspective in the sense that we're not tied to a team, so we just monitor the 352 other Division I athletic accounts and see it. what those departments are doing, what you all are doing, and how we can make ourselves better because of that. And I think something that we've seen is showcasing new projects, even if they're progressing slower than what was previously planned, has been returning an incredible amount of fan engagement on those pieces. I think fans want to see the positive story that there's really not much of out there right now, not just in sports. I don't think really anywhere in the world you're going to find a lot of positive story, unfortunately. So I think that that's something that we've seen. Really anything to show, I guess, hope is probably what it comes down to the most, showing hope for the future, showing some sense of normalcy has returned for the programs who have focused on that.
We are getting ready to open, we hope, a brand new football stadium that's gone up in less than 24 months this fall. And we posted yesterday, we were in the admin building, seeing our offices for the first time. We're supposed to move in the next couple of weeks, and went out on the veranda, took a 15-second video clip panning the stadium. It's been one of our most popular things we've posted pretty much all summer. I think in that instance, I just look at it like people are just so excited about getting in there that despite the circumstances financially of things, I mean, that's what our fans have been waiting for this for 10 years. So I don't think we're going to run away from that.
Absolutely, Brian. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing around the country as well. I know Clemson's opening up a new soccer facility. I know Xavier's doing some work on a athletic support or training facility. And there's plenty of others around the country. I think some of the things that we've seen is progress might be slowing, but the impact that it's going to make on student athletes, the impact it's going to make on the fans is certainly still there. Whether or not it happens in the next 6 months, or maybe it's pushed back to a whole nother year, it's still happening. And in some sense, it's going to make an impact on people. And I think that's what, at least from our perspective, is what the fans have liked to see. Just a sense of hope that something positive is happening around something that they care about.
Yeah, and I think that transparency of just being real with where we're at with things, I think fans are very forgiving, and, they just, seeing those sneak peeks. So, the 15-second pano, or even just giving like short video tours of this is where we're at. I mean, I know there's a ton of jumping back to TikTok, but just, follow me along for this journey as I reno this, people really like, being a part of that and seeing where you started to where you're at now. So those little snippets, it creates that excitement that fans want. And as you mentioned, Brian, that fans are just, they want to be there so bad. So even giving them just that little teaser of, what that feels like and what it, will look like is very, very, good for a fan and something they respond positively to.
Any other thoughts around some of the newer content strategies, or I guess questions around content strategy? Cool. The last point that I wanted to move on to, and this is the one that intrigues me the most, just because there's been so much of a difference around the country on how it's been perceived, is the social injustice that's been happening in the country. I think it goes without saying that it's been a troublesome time for everybody for the last couple months. But seeing how college sports and different college athletic departments have handled some of the conversations and some of the topics in their departments, from their student athletes, their coaches, their administrators, I guess just an open dialogue of how the conversations with student athletes or administrators have been, I guess, initiated, or how they've been displayed to the public. The NCAA, I'll start by saying the NCAA has taken a massive stance on promoting the voices of the student athletes, something that we might have walked away from a couple months ago because of some of the raw emotion, essentially, from the student athletes, and something that we in the past might not have deemed as appropriate for our platforms. We've certainly reevaluated and found that we were missing a mark. And We've promoted student athlete voices. We're going to continue to promote student athlete voices with no timeline. It's an open addition to our strategy that's going to continue on. The biggest thing for us is unfiltered content. If student athletes want to come out and talk about some of their experiences, we're not going to filter any of that when we might have walked away from some pieces of content due to, let's say, language or some of the more aggressive voice that student athletes might have had. So I'd be interested to hear how that's, I guess, happening during or in athletic departments around the country, since we're just one department.
I want to shout out Xavier on this one. I think they did a really good job with, and you guys jumped on it like very quickly early when everything was going down, but they pretty much just handed over the platform. The student athletes were able to talk, and it was kind of starting that open conversation of this is where we are and this is where we want to go. So I thought it was very well done.
Yeah, we're lucky that our student athletes, they took a lot of initiative and they scripted the whole thing. They filmed the whole thing. We just pieced it together and posted it for them. So I think that's what we kind of learned through this whole thing is like, we just need to listen to them and what they want and what they want us to do and what they want to say, because it's their message, not ours. So that's definitely a big takeaway from this.
Has anyone had any other kind of ways of, whether it's coming out as a department as a whole or, strategies as far as, amplifying student athlete voices, like that example there? Any other, initiatives or strategies that you guys have been implementing to kind of voice that? Or even if it hasn't been, your department or or along those lines, but another institution or league or something that you've seen do something unique in that realm.
I'll go ahead and talk. So here at UTSA, we provided the opportunity for our athletes to have to use us as a platform. As a university, we did come out with a statement from our athletic director and how the university was going to support and amplify our student athletes. But when we were talking in our social media meeting, it was just like, we don't want to push anything onto them without the athletes wanting to come forward with that. So we really took it to our SAC group, and they started a couple things here and there, but a lot of them were hesitant to come out as individuals to say something. So that it kind of didn't really go anywhere. We were still promoting within our department groups for people to talk about these issues. I know that our support is still there, but recently Conference USA requested a couple interviews with social action questions on there. So it's not really coming from us individually or us creating it, which we originally wanted to, which is why we provided the platform, but we didn't want it to also feel forced. We didn't want them to say, this is what you're going to talk about. It was more of, hey, we have all of our platforms, you have all the support of us, we're here to help you create whatever it is that you want to create. So we're still pushing that, we're still providing those, but as far as like a lot of content that I see a lot of schools doing, it really seems some student athlete created, and we haven't gotten to that just yet with our athletes feeling comfortable. So we're still trying to create that comfortable environment for them. And I think that's probably the first part. A lot of us are new in our department, so a lot of our athletes don't really feel that connection with us just yet. But that's kind of where we're headed to. Hopefully the Conference USA Media Day interviews help us out a little bit with that.
I think one thing that I saw our social department do really well was we utilized like the assets that we have in Arizona, like our video board, stuff like that. And then we have like a unique connection to the Pac-12 network, but also ESPN through Herm Edwards. We're able to get multiple of our student athletes' stories national attention. And that really resonated with our fan base. I work on the sales side, so I got to hear those comments, and it was nearly all positive, which is amazing for something that's so controversial.
I will say that we've been really focused on the internal aspect of this thing and figuring out what changes can be made internally within our organizations to support our student athletes in the best way. I think what resonates with them most is going to be not what statements we put on social media, but what they experience on our campuses and in our departments. So that's been a huge focus for us. Over the last month, we've been working on a lot of different subcommittees under our Diversity and Inclusion Committee at Texas. And we this week have rolled out over 30 action items that we're going to be implementing over the next year or so. So that's been very hopeful. But I think it is a matter of audience, and I think the focus on what things we can do from a structural standpoint to make sure our student athletes are supported is most important. One outward-facing thing that has come out of those discussions has been how we support our students in the digital space. So even when they're on their personal platforms and they're making statements and they're expressing how these global conversations are impacting them, I think it's important for us as staff, not necessarily under the umbrella of the department, but from our own accounts to show our support of our student athletes. Things like that are going to resonate a lot more than a blanketed statement that we can all kind of hide behind. So that's been something that we've been really encouraging staff to do. And it's something that, you know, as much as you can do at your own institution, I think is really important that you find a way to kind of prop up those students when they are being vulnerable and taking the risk and going out there and saying how they feel about something, knowing that there's thousands of fans that are going to respond one way or the other to whatever they tweet. So I think that's one way we can show up for them and create a culture change in the way that we're supporting them in action.
I think that's a really great point. It's just adding to it that it's not just yes, as the department, we support you, but then, I mean, obviously there's so many people that make up that department. So if not only that, if you personally, the department amplifies it, whether it's a retweet or something like that, but then if you go and do it yourself, you think about that, of all the people who make up the department, going just how that gets that voice farther and shows that support. I think that's a really huge point that you brought up there.
Yeah, I would echo what Aaron said. With UNT, we've kind of been along the same lines. It's been a lot of try and get our own house in order before we start looking at others and external statements. We've been doing a lot on the internal side. And then just like he said with our student athletes as well, I mean, we've always been, positive and promoting of their messages that they want to send, but even more so recently, making sure that they know from our standpoint, hey, this is a safe space. You can say what you want, share the messages you want. And, just looking at our own stuff before we start doing a whole lot externally.
In some of the conversations that we've had with student athletes, whether it's in the DMs or on another form of communication, email, text, there's been some student athletes who might come back and say, our athletic department, I don't want to say doesn't support us, but doesn't really agree with some of the vision that we've had or with that they've had. Is there anybody who's experienced any of that? And how do you approach that situation where a student athlete wants to say something that might completely contradict what the department's stance is or what the department publicly has to say about it?
I'll speak up on that. One of the teams I work with at Syracuse, we took a stance of listening to our coaches and student athletes and kind of letting them lead the conversation in the direction. And one of my teams didn't really have anything that they came to me with. And so I had just, I guess, been complacent and accepted that they didn't want to make a statement or be proactive about anything that's been going on. And then about 3 weeks later, I got a text message from one of our seniors on the team telling me, you're doing a really bad job of representing us and all this stuff. And I gave that team, first I met with her one-on-one on FaceTime and talked to her, explained to her where I was coming from, asked her if they had discussed it or anything or their feelings as a team yet, and she had said no, and so I had given them a platform to talk about it with me, let them choose the time to meet and everything, and some of them came to our meeting, but I didn't even have majority of the team show up, and so when I had a follow-up discussion with that first student athlete who had reached out to me, I encouraged her to share how she was feeling, but I had to explain to her that, you know, I can't be the voice of a team without hearing from that team, with only hearing from 3 or 4 or 5 of them. And so I encouraged her to be the leader on her team and speak, use her platform on her social media, and I would help amplify if she wanted to. I would help her, get her in touch with any media, pitch a story, anything like that to help her. And I don't really know if she liked my response, but I think that her and her teammates kind of understood, like, I can't be your voice in this sense. I can be your voice when you're playing games, but I don't want to speak for you guys. You're all young individuals. You all have different opinions, but if we want to do something, we should do it as a team. So I'm still a little traumatized from that conversation, but I'm happy that she spoke up to me. I just wish that I was more proactive on my end, speaking to that team in particular. All the other teams I work with came to me, but that one didn't.
I can speak on this topic a little bit. We're a smaller Catholic university, and we kind of came across an issue of a lot of our student athletes, in particular one of our teams was very strong and involved in this movement, and unfortunately our athletic department was kind of limited by main campus in the type of messaging we could put out. When it came down to it, they wanted to be completely uniform, down to retweets and likes. And so we were confined to just putting out what the main campus side of our university was putting out. And so we got a little bit of lashback from student athletes coming forward and saying that they didn't have a platform to speak up and voice their opinions. But unfortunately, that was a reality that we really didn't have any control over, especially because it had come from main campus side of the university, and our athletic director had said that that's what we were going to go with. So I think that was a little bit hard, especially because I'm the one dealing with the coaches and the student athletes, and the grievances kind of come directly towards you as the person who's dealing with them directly. So it was disappointing to kind of feel like I was letting them down, but the reality of everything behind it was just a little bit more complex.
That's interesting. Has anybody, I guess in that same sense, is there an athletic department who's taken a different stance from their university, and how has that, I mean, I guess just personally asking, how has that impacted some of the relationships or some of the conversations that you have with your counterparts on the university side?
Well, I'll chime in. Our interim president worked hand in hand with our department, and I think he did a really good job of bringing folks from around the campus together, and took a methodical approach to looking at all the considerations. We had a lot of input from student athletes in particular, about changes they wanted to see, and Student Government Association, of course. And so he did a really good job of bringing together alumni, a ton of stakeholders to the table, including athletics at the very forefront of that, to make sure that all those considerations were made and all those voices were heard. He met with student groups. There was open communication throughout that process so that when the university side came out with a statement, we didn't have to deal with that question mark of whether or not we would be on the same page since everyone was involved. So I think that was a key lesson learned in the process of, just kind of communicating with everyone on campus.
Great. Are there any other thoughts or questions around that idea of some of the more tough conversations going on in athletic departments, or any other questions that people have from any of this before we sign off here?
I'll chime in really quick. You guys all have a really tough job being the voices of your athletic departments in this time. And, from what I'm hearing today, I think you guys are all approaching it really well. So my thumbs up and kudos to everyone on the call who shared today. Very well done.
Yeah, I'll emphasize that. Really appreciate everyone speaking up and sharing kind of whether it's, positive or use improvement, or just the difficulty of, all of these topics in this time that, we're encountering, but just everyone kind of speaking up and sharing, your perspective and your department's perspective has been very beneficial. I did see we had one more question in the chat. I know a few jumped in to kind of answer, and there's a little discussion going on in there, but just to bring it to the forefront before we wrap up, Carlos had the question of, are any schools connecting with surveys at this time to season ticket holders, donors, fans, to discover, what those fans' confidence is in attendance, importance of safety protocols, and development impacts?
I will toss my thoughts to somebody else. The NCAA doesn't really have any season ticket holders. We have ticket holders, and for some of the championships, I'm not sure if any outreach has been done to those, as our team's really not involved in that. But interesting question for sure.
Yeah, this is Nick Joseph at Mizzou, and yes, we have surveyed our fans relative to their comfort level, as well as what would make them safer and things like that. And then as we've worked with a consultant, we've used that data to develop our plan relative to keeping the fans safe within the facilities, I guess, plural.
Yeah. So is that survey distributed just via email, or is it, to more targeted groups, or is it kind of been more widely sent?
Yeah, good question. We just because of the time, randomly picked like 100 donors, 100 non-donors, all various levels, and did it out of our season ticket base that way.
Nice. Has the user base been pretty responsive to that survey?
Yes.
Have you seen?
Yes, it has been. It was very helpful. Awesome. Although the one thing that's probably, the one thing they were overwhelmingly against, again, the group that we surveyed was against, was wearing masks within the stadium, and that's obviously something that will most likely be happening. So we'll see how that goes.
Just give them a branded one for Mizzou, and they'll have new gear.
You got it. That's the plan.
Awesome. I think that's definitely one of my favorite things, is dropping on different people's, different schools' websites. And I think almost everyone will have a splash page with, a branded mask or something like that. I always think that's such a interesting thing to think of, when this is all behind us, when we just look in a box and we have all these masks and stuff. I think it's funny, or interesting anyways. But anyone else on that survey topic, or, unique questions that you've been asking on those surveys to kind of get a feel for where fans are at?
We met a couple weeks ago, and in that discussion, a small group of us, we've already laid the groundwork whenever the decision comes of what capacity is going to be if sports are played in the fall. And that we're going to use social media as a tool to get that information out to everyone, not just rely on press releases and a website. And I guess I had a question for Nick. If the NCAA office has had discussions of anything along those lines to reach out to the communities that already know they're going to host NCAA events in the fall, that we might be able to take from you on how you might disperse that message and what it would be? Or is everything in the fall just kind of TBA based on results, so you haven't had that discussion yet?
Yeah, from our standpoint, our team's directly involved in the social and digital conversations and lead those. We're not really too involved in the operations conversations to the extent of any prediction on what's going to happen. Your guess for what's going to happen in the fall is just as good as mine. And we operate similarly to your department. We're certainly not siloed from any of the decisions the NCAA makes, but we operate in a separate kind of with a separate set of rules of engagement from our side, I guess. We operate as an independent media source, if you will. We're separate from the NCAA. Our team specifically is separate from the NCAA Blue Disc brand at NCAA. Our team does not oversee that. Our team specifically oversees all sport, NCAA baseball, NCAA soccer, NCAA volleyball, all of those accounts. And because of that, we're just not involved in some of the conversations like that. Brian, to answer your question, we don't have any messaging that we've prepared for championships to be postponed or championships to be canceled or championships to be moved to a different site. We're not, again, your guess here is as good as ours for what could happen in the fall.
Yeah, but I guess what I was kind of asking more specifically is, like, I don't know if soccer's in Cary in the fall, for example, but if the time comes that there's an announcement that, like, have you guys thought about a way to reach out to the people of Cary specifically who would be affected by that decision when it happens?
Yeah, the insight that I can give is what we did for the spring championships, and I'll use the example of Omaha and the College World Series. That's one of the championships that I'm most closely involved with. We work with the local organizing committee, College World Series of Omaha, and similar to any other championship, there's LOCs around the country for every championship. And my best guess would be that we would be collaborating very closely with the LOC. I know for the Final Four, the men's and women's, we're in close conversation. I have a bi-weekly meeting with the people down in San Antonio for the women's Final Four happening next, what would that be? Happening next April, I guess. And some of our conversations are around that. So I would say that it most likely go out to some of the LOC contacts or the people who are directly involved in some of the organizing aspects.
I can tell you from the CWS Inc. side, from the spring championships, we're already having on the operations side those conversations for spring. So I know that they have been taking place for fall. And so Nick's right, it will be conversations, and they're probably already happening with the LOCs on how these championships are going to look moving forward, and in this, how things are as of right now, and how the community's public health restrictions are in which those championships are happening. So there is a lot of movement on the operations side, I know.
That was a great question, though, Brian. That's, I think, one of the conversations that we have in our internal teams all the time.
Any other questions before we wrap it up here? Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, so you should be seeing our thank you slide up. So just wanted, again, thank you all for joining, for coming with questions to join this discussion today. Obviously, huge thank you to Nick for hosting and moderating this week. And of course, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to anyone on our team. We'd be happy to connect you with those on this call. Otherwise, you can see on the slide here, please feel free to register for our future Game Day Insiders. Our next one will be August 6th, and will be hosted by Nick Lawson, who is the CEO at Squad. But of course, just wanted to thank you all again, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Stay safe and take care.
Sid, I'll marry you real quick too for next week. We got a lot of Nicks that are on our board. And so for anyone that wants to kind of forward that on to your sponsorship team, that's a big topic of conversation right now, is how to engage sponsors with limited or no sports going on. So Nick, that's going to be a big topic of discussion for him. So anyone that has a sponsorship team, development team, anything like that, that'd be a really good one for you to join here in a couple of weeks. So thanks again, though. Everyone have a great rest of the week. Take care. Be safe.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Feel bad removing them, but I did.